So the New York Giants have Russell Wilson as their starter. But what do they do about quarterback going forward? Not a lot of options. We'll discuss on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready. Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert, the mastermind, Ross Jackson. On today's episode, we're going to talk about Abdul Carter missing his pro day, talk about the Browns potentially making a move up one spot for a quarterback, but we'll start with Russell Wilson wanting the starting job in New York. But what about 2026 and moving forward? Before we dive into all of that, though, do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Russell Wilson said he wants the starter job.
Well, you know how it goes when anytime that Jameis Winston is in town, there's always the chance that he takes that from you.
Yeah, you're not lying about that. Winston does present some high-end upside, but some pretty high downside as well. But either way, look, I wasn't surprised by that. I think it's pretty clear that Russell Wilson is taking this opportunity because he feels he can be a starter. We have heard clips from Patricia Traina on Locked On Giants on this show in the past month saying that the Giants were very interested in Russell Wilson last year before they ended up pivoting to Drew Lock, and Russell Wilson obviously went to the Steelers and thought that was a better situation. So there's clearly interest between these two parties, the Giants and Russell Wilson, prior to that. At this point, I think he will be their starter. I think when he says, I want the starter job, I don't think he would have signed there if they didn't tell him
100%.
Yes, we're planning on you being our starter. We're not going to Kirk Cousins you in the draft and surprise you with a young rookie quarterback. So I may be reading too far into this, but in my opinion, my read of the situation for this year is Russell Wilson will be their starter. Winston will be the backup. And if they take any quarterback, it may be on day 2 or day 3 of the draft. Am I crazy to think that that is the reality here, regardless of what they say?
No, I don't think you're crazy with that at all. I think that that's true. I think that there's an absolute opportunity, especially if the value is there at some point later on in the draft, if a Jackson Dart falls or if a Jalen Milroe falls to a place where you really do want to bank on that upside, you know what I mean? Especially athleticism-wise, pair him with a Russell Wilson and a great attitude mentor when it comes to Jameis Winston there too. Like, that's a good situation for a young quarterback to be. So even with Russell Wilson, and I agree with you, I think he should have that starting job and probably doesn't take it unless he's getting that starting job. But it doesn't mean that you don't also go out there and try to invest in something for your future instead of waiting for next year's class, an opportunity to potentially develop somebody here in 2025 for what you want to do moving into the future if it's not Russell Wilson for another year.
100%. Look, we could talk about those plans, but Jalen Milroe learning from Russell Wilson is maybe the best thing that could possibly happen to Jalen Milroe. But I do want to mention the Steelers here too, because these two teams and Wilson and Rodgers have kind of been tied together throughout this process. And now we're starting to hear little whispers that it might be Steelers or retirement, and that Rodgers truly is considering retirement. We've heard from our guy, Chris Carter from Locked On Steelers, and we might hear from him again here soon, but we've heard from Chris Carter, and he isn't very interested in Aaron Rodgers. All they've done so far is bring back Mason Rudolph. Knowing how Chris feels, Ross, do you think that it would be wise for the Steelers at this point to go with Mason Rudolph and look to draft a quarterback as soon as they can, or would you still wait for Aaron Rodgers? And if you're Rodgers, would you rather play for the Steelers or retire?
Yeah, I mean, the Rodgers thing, I'll tell you what I want the most for Aaron Rodgers is, because I think a lot of people are tired of talking about him, and so they just want him to retire and stuff like that. But here's the thing that I really want for Aaron Rodgers. What I really want for Aaron Rodgers is for him to just be able to land somewhere and be a football player again. Not have to be this personality, this big thing, that big thing, this distraction, that distraction. Just be back to being able to play whatever version of football he has left. That's my biggest hope for Aaron Rodgers. So let me put that out there. But when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think they should invest and take a swing in this year's draft and then be ready to take a swing in next year's draft too. And then if Aaron Rodgers wants to wait to see what the Steelers do in the draft, he has his right to do that. There's a lot of veteran guys that do that now. You look at wide receivers that are still out in the market, like Keenan Allen and Amari Cooper, like they could be doing the same thing. Now I say that, now watch, they're going to end up signing.
They'll sign
before this releases. But the idea is that, you wait to see if there's an opportunity. Tyler, I remember back in 2017 here in New Orleans, the Saints signed a post-peak Adrian Peterson. But they signed him here in 2017, felt like he'd be a good compliment to Mark Ingram. And then in the third round of that very same draft, weeks later, they trade up for Alvin Kamara. And then that led to Adrian Peterson being traded to the Arizona Cardinals less than a quarter into the season. That's a thing that veteran players are trying to avoid. Maybe that's part of what Aaron Rodgers is trying to avoid here. But if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, whether it's Jackson Dart, maybe a little bit later, a Kyle McCord or a Will Howard, somebody like that, I'm taking a swing at a developmental player. And then if I can get Aaron Rodgers, I'll get Aaron Rodgers, and I'll be ready to take a swing again in 2026 if I need to cast a wide net if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Well, that's a great point, because if you go with Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson as your quarterbacks in 2025, it makes the future very, very murky. And how to address this in the future is something that Chris Carter from Locked On Steelers had a crossover episode with Patricia Traina from Locked On Giants about here this week.
The plan is to set the team up with, to be semi-competitive, try to win some games, try to keep your core together so that you can go get that quarterback in the next year's draft class, and that be the rebuild that you actually go through to make yourself competitive and one of the better teams in the NFL again. And so that I think is both team strategies. That's why they were like the last two teams looking for partners on the quarterback dance floor. And now that you Russell Wilson, clearly the lanes back to the Steelers are closed, so he's going to go to the Giants, where he'll be there with Jameis Winston. I think you presume that Russell Wilson would start there. And I think that's kind of what it is. Both teams are looking for temporary solutions, and these are two Super Bowl champion veterans who've been in the NFL quite some time that you can bring in and say, hey, please play this offense, stick to the plan, and help us get ready for next year. And these guys have to understand that, like, look, you're not the guy anymore. You're a guy.
You're not the guy anymore. You're a guy. That makes sense. But I would just harken back to something that Chris Carter talked about. I used as a clip on this show, is that expecting like next year's class is going to do this and that. It's just a very dangerous thing. A lot of people and a lot of fan bases right now are saying, oh, let's tank for Arch Manning. Well, Arch Manning has no financial reason to fast forward to the NFL. He may not even come out this year. And then you're talking about Sam Levitt or Lenora Sellers or, Garrett Nussmeier and Drew Aller. And I just think the last time the Steelers tried to play this game, they ended up with the Kenny Pickett draft class. So thinking that, hey, we'll just kick the can down the road and next year we'll go after. I agree with you and what you're saying. They need to take a chance on somebody now, whether it's Jackson Dart at 21, trading down. I think Jalen Milroe would be an awesome Pittsburgh Steeler. Just something about that feels right to me. Maybe it's because I liked Cordell Stewart so much growing up, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it just feels right looking at that. Just a great fit in terms of aura, in my opinion. But I think it's dangerous to play we'll just get them next year. Like, no, both these teams need to take a developmental quarterback this year, right now, so that they have something in case next year is another Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis draft.
Yeah, exactly. Don't just take one swing, take multiple swings. That's how you land a quarterback. You have to cast that wide net, and you got to keep swinging until you strike out. And when you strike out, you're up to bat again. So get ready to keep swinging. Like, that's the way you've got to do it.
Yeah, if your Will Levis doesn't work out, then you're in position to draft a Cam Ward. And speaking of that, the Cleveland Browns are not in position to draft Cam Ward, but could they be? Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, my favorite sportsbook by far, not close. And you know what else I really love? March Madness. And March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, even who's going to cut down the nets. Look, guys, I am not ashamed to admit I like picking the favorites, and this year it has been very, very good. I can back those favorites with spreads, totals, props, anything I want. FanDuel makes it so easy. The app is so simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly with no waiting around. Make sure that you visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Once again, make sure that you visit FanDuel.com. All right, Ross, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about the New York Giants going with Russell Wilson, Pittsburgh Steelers still waiting on Aaron Rodgers, and what that means for them going forward in the future at the quarterback position. But now we need to talk about the quarterback position right now, because the Tennessee Titans look locked in to take Cam Ward number 1 overall, but the Cleveland Browns are one spot behind, and they could, in theory, make the move up. But if they make that move, it's going to be pretty expensive. And my guy Spencer from Locked On Browns talked about the recent reports on the cost.
Titans, according to a report from Adam Schefter, are at least open to fielding offers for the number 1 pick, even though they're hosting Cam Ward now on a private workout. Cam Ward said at his pro day on Monday he was going to seal the deal that day. Apparently he didn't, because the Titans are still bringing him in. They're going to have a private workout. He's going to throw for him again. And the fact that Schefter's reporting that they're at least the phone lines are open, if you will, would suggest that they maybe still aren't sold on Cam Ward as the number 1 overall pick. And I think the exact report was something along the lines of like they've grown more interested in him, but they're at least fielding calls still. And my biggest takeaway from that is, listen, if they were sold on Cam Ward, if this was like Andrew Luck or something, there would be no price that teams are willing to pay. Now, he mentioned that they're like the price is higher than it was. Like you're going to have to give up even more of a premium to get to one to get him, because they do like him enough now, it seems, to at least pull the trigger on him. And they know that he's now impressed everybody to the point where, teams maybe come calling and you're like, now I can ask for more because he's the coveted quarterback of the class. So you might have to pay higher price.
The Browns probably will have to pay a higher price. But, Ross, it's just impossible to – I cover the Titans. I have, my people that I talk to who I trust, who, know information or can at least give you things. As I know, Ross, in this industry, nobody ever knows anything for certain. It's just about what you can trust and what makes sense, But everything that we're hearing now is that the Titans wanted 2 first-round picks at the Combine, and now they want 3 first-round picks. So while I agree with Spencer that if the Titans saw Cam Ward as an Andrew Luck or a Joe Burrow or even Trevor Lawrence got that hype coming out of Clemson as well. Very decorated. He got that best prospect since, Andrew Luck tag.
Right.
I agree that if the Titans thought about Cam Ward that way, then there would be no trade. But I'm sorry, like I know in the NFL, you never say never. You never say never. If somebody comes to you with a Herschel Walker level trade, or if somebody's really willing to give up pick 2, next year's first, 2027 first, a couple mid-rounders, 1 this year, 1 next year. Like if somebody's willing to give that up, pretty much any NFL team that doesn't have the top 4 quarterbacks would be like I think Justin Herbert would go for that sort of trade package, quite frankly. Like I really do think if the Vikings were to offer that in a swap with J.J. McCarthy or something, like the Chargers would do that. So while I do agree that, Cam Ward isn't on the level of Luck or Burrow or Lawrence as a prospect coming out, just because the Titans are willing to take a historic trade return from somebody doesn't mean that they don't like Cam Ward. I can't put those 2 things together.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, look, you buy a house, you look at multiple houses. You rent a car, or you buy a car, you look at multiple cars. You rent an apartment, you look at multiple apartments. Like you're always going to, and I think that the rule in the NFL is make yourself say no. Make yourself say no. Don't assume that you would say no. Go ahead and weed out all of the different opportunities. That way, when you make that pick, you make that pick with all certainty. You're not making that pick going, I wonder what I would have done if the Cleveland Browns would have offered me 3 first-round picks. No, make them offer you 3 first-round picks. Right. Make yourself say no. And then that way, when you select Cam Ward at number 1 overall, which is exactly what I expect the Tennessee Titans will do, by the way, they're going to make that phone call to him as he's one of, I think, the 8 people that were invited to the NFL draft this year as terms of draft prospects.
No one wants to go to Green Bay, Ross.
I know. I think it's like a little bit of that. And I think the NFL realized that like those first round guys that sit around and never get the phone call, it's bad TV. I think they finally figured out that it's bad TV. And so now they've whittled it down. But like Cam Ward's going to be the first one to get that phone call, and he's going to get that phone call from the Memphis, Tennessee area. And I think that is going to be what's going to happen. But I think that you still put yourself through the process as a team. That's what good organizations do. You put yourself through the process, make yourself say no. The Cleveland Browns should call, and the Tennessee Titans will probably say no. And that's going to check a big box for the Tennessee Titans before they make before they run that card.
Now, the question is, if you're the Titans, what would it take for you to come off Cam Ward? Now, I know that a lot of this is probably like how much you like Cam Ward as a player personally.
Yep.
But if you're the Titans, assuming you do like Cam Ward and think that he can be maybe not elite, but a franchise quarterback, like I always think I think every team should be looking for a Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is not Burrow, Lamar, Mahomes, Allen. He's not on that level, but he's in the next level before. And I think that's the minimum that you can win with in the NFL is someone in the Jalen Hurts tier. I keep comparing Cam Ward to like a Dak Prescott, a Jordan Love. I think he's kind of like that style of player or that talent level. What would it take for you to trade off of him, assuming that that's where he's at?
Yeah, I'll tell you the other thing that matters in this, not just how I feel about Cam Ward, but how do I feel about Shedeur Sanders? If I really, really, really like Shedeur Sanders, then the Browns offering me three first-round picks is way more appealing than, let's say, the Giants offering me 3 first-round picks. Because if I really like Shedeur Sanders, I still get the quarterback that I like. And I think Tennessee should walk away with a quarterback in the top 2 in this year's draft. And so it's different if the New Orleans Saints come calling and say, hey, we'll give you 9, 40, 2 first-round picks and a 2026 second. That could be an appealing trade package because it's still 3 first-round picks and a pair of seconds. But if you really like Shedeur Sanders, you're not just trading out of Cam Ward, you're trading out of Shedeur Sanders in that situation.
Yes.
So are you willing to take a trade package that moves you out of 2 quarterbacks as opposed to just 1? So I think that's got to be a big part of it as well. If you really, really like Shedeur Sanders as the Tennessee Titans, in the 3 first-round picks and probably a second-round pick somewhere, likely in this year's draft, is should probably be enough to make me say yes. If I like Shedeur Sanders almost as much as I like Cam Ward. But I'll tell you what, if I'm not as big a fan of Shedeur Sanders as I am Cam Ward, then there's really no trade package, but I'm going to have a really good time telling you no.
See, I am a fan of Shedeur Sanders. I have Cam Ward as the best quarterback. And I think when you're picking number 1, you go for the high-end upside and the high-end traits. Like you're picking number 1. You got to go for the fences here.
You wanted the surest thing possible.
I personally would take 3 first-round picks in Shedeur Sanders over just Cam Ward. And I think, quite honestly, I think the Browns would too. And that's why the Browns.
Yeah, probably. Exactly right.
The Browns are not going to do that. And the Titans should say no to anything that isn't that. And the Browns should say no to that price. Neither team is in a position where I think they can afford to do that. I think the Giants were in more of a position. I know it sounds crazy, but Malik Neighbors and Andrew Thomas and Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau, and now you're adding Javon Holland. Like, I liked what the Giants had on the roster and think that they are the closest team to being a quarterback away out of those 3 teams at the top.
Yeah.
But, if you're the Browns, I just don't see how you can do that. And quite frankly, I don't even know if the Browns are going to take Shedeur Sanders. They could go with Abdul Carter, but, there is more uncertainty today about Abdul Carter than there was before, and we'll tell you why. All right, capping off today's edition of Locked On NFL, talked about Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers and those situations again. Talked about the Browns and the Titans and the number 1 pick quarterback situation. Obviously, very important topics that will change a lot in the NFL. But now I do want to get into one of the defensive prospects. Ross, we don't get the opportunity to talk a ton about edge rushers in the draft on this program for obvious reasons. But we got some big-time news on Abdul Carter on Thursday that I think should create some uncertainty for these teams at the top. And I do want to point out that in a recent mock draft style episode of Locked On NFL Draft, which you make Locked On NFL your first listen, or maybe your first listen's your favorite team, you get to Locked On NFL, you got to get to Locked On NFL Draft. with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. I'm telling you, folks, two of the absolute best draft analysts in the universe, and they're giving you 30 minutes of free content every single day.
Every day.
The draft is right around the corner, and they talked about taking Abdul Carter at number 2 for the Cleveland Browns.
Or like, okay, we just paid Myles Garrett, so we're good at we got our guy. If we lost Myles, they will understand it. Why did you decide to pass on Shedeur at 2 with the need at quarterback and taking Abdul Carter?
Yeah, I think this is a reflection of the kind of the current status of the pursuit of veterans, like what the quarterback situation is going to be. And honestly, going with more of a sure thing, right? As the Cleveland Browns kind of rebuild, I feel as though you can plug and play Abdul Carter immediately, right? Like he plays multiple things within the defense. Like everybody gets excited about Myles Garrett. You know how he kind of started the little kind of basketball crossover thing over the center, right? Doing that and then rushing the center. Well, Abdul Carter can do some things too. And then so you give yourself probably one of the best defensive fronts in the NFL.
Listen. If they go out and they get like Kirk Cousins or something, I would personally, like I said, I like Shedeur Sanders,
right?
But I like Abdul Carter more. Abdul Carter is my number 1 player in the draft. And I'll tell you the honest truth. I preferred Abdul Carter over Cam Ward for the Titans. But my opinion has been if the Titans believe in Cam Ward as a franchise quarterback, then I'm on board because Mike Orgonzi coming in, I trust his judgment coming from Kansas City. I give people the opportunity to succeed until they show me that I shouldn't trust them. You know what I mean? So I'm there, but I love Abdul Carter. And I personally think if the Browns pass or if the Browns don't get the opportunity to take Cam Ward and don't trade up, they should take Abdul Carter to make an incredible defensive front and then draft a quarterback in the second round where they have the number 1 pick in the second round at number 33. You can move up into the second to get like a Jackson Dart or maybe Shedeur Sanders does fall, man. Like that could happen.
Who knows?
If he gets past the Saints, if he gets past number 9, there could be a free fall coming for Shedeur Sanders, and the Browns could trade back up and get him then. So I'm with the guys from Locked On NFL Draft. If I'm the Browns and Cam Ward goes 1, I'm taking Abdul Carter.
Yeah, I love it. I think the biggest thing is just going to be, getting him in for maybe a top 30 visit or something like that and get the medical checks in. And do that with your team doctors. Because, look, when you're drafting 1, 2, or 3 overall, wherever it is that, how it is every year to where everybody says, like, well, we know this pick. So the draft really starts at blah, blah, blah. No, the draft starts at 1 because you have to be sure about who you're drafting at those prime positions, particularly at the top 3 picks in the NFL draft. I would even say the top 5 picks in the NFL draft. But, you inherently get more and more risk as the draft moves on because you get less and less sure players. But I think you have to be certain. And so if you're going to take Abdul Carter, the only thing you need to do is make sure you're certain about Abdul Carter and those medicals. And so get him to your facility, have him come in for a visit, do the medical checks, and see what your team says, your medical team says about that player. And if they sign off on him, it makes perfect sense if they were to go with Abdul Carter, who I agree with you is the number 1 talent in this year's draft, even over the quarterback, because this isn't a situation where you're drafting the offensive lineman who has no quarterback to block for or the wide receiver that has nobody to throw to. This is you getting a cornerstone franchise defensive player that can help you win a championship with your other cornerstone franchise defensive player who you somehow got to stay in Cleveland in Myles Garrett. And I'm all about that.
And when you go up against Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson 4 times a year, and that makes a big difference in your season. And right, potentially. I mean, it makes sense that you need to prioritize getting to those quarterbacks. I also want to say, like you're talking about the medical checks, it became harder to have certainty. So we heard that Abdul Carter, when he had revealed that he had the stress fracture in his foot, or the stress reaction, they tried to call it. Drew Rosenhaus, man, working overtime. He was supposed to put on, quote unquote, put on a show at his pro day.
Right.
Well, now we got the news the day of the pro day that he would not be participating in the pro day. And it's not because of that foot. It's because of the shoulder, even though he knew about the shoulder at the combine and said he would be able to work at the pro day. And now they're saying, oh, well, the shoulder's not healing as well. Don't pay attention to the foot. It's like the Wizard of Oz. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. It's the foot issue that's concerning. And Ross, I'm sorry, we've seen examples of this not mattering and this mattering, but the examples of this mattering have often been, hey, I don't need surgery. Oh, you just drafted me. Now I have a contract. Now my future's secured. Oh, now I need to get that pin in my foot. Now I need to get that work done. Now I need to get that surgery. So I'm sorry. This seems like an agent who's known for playing a dangerous game in Drew Rosenhaus, doing Drew Rosenhaus things, and making it seem like his client's perfectly fine when he really needs surgery. And when you talk about getting that medical check and, now we're hearing he'll probably do private workouts in April. Man, I think Abdul Carter is a great prospect. I said my number one prospect in the draft. But if you don't have clarity on whether or not he needs surgery, it would be hard to draft him with one of those picks that you just said how important they are and how you cannot miss when you have picks that high. So something needs to get figured out there. I think that is, whereas I didn't think it was a big deal before, it coming out now after him saying, I'm going to tear up my pro day, it does matter now. Now it is a concern.
Yeah, and the look is a lot worse with the announcement coming on the day of the pro day as opposed to a couple weeks before the pro day or even a few days before the pro day. It wouldn't have been great, but it would have been better than the day of the pro day. And so that's something to keep in mind there too. And this goes to what we were talking about, right? Like you have to be certain when you're making these selections. And I wouldn't even go so far, Tyler, as to say that you can't miss. You just have to be certain you won't at the time that you make the pick. And then either you do or you don't. And that can be for any number of reasons afterwards. But that's why I think that the medical checks for the team are going to be so important, because the medical checks by the team are going to be able to say, no, we do think you need surgery. And so they'll know that before they make that selection. And then they either need to make that selection knowing that that surgery is going to be a thing and that he's probably going to have to miss some time, and they're going to have to be okay with that. And they're looking towards the future of that, because you don't draft a guy in 2025 for what they're going to do in 2025. You draft for what they're hopefully still doing in 2035. And so you're okay. If you're okay with that, then you're okay with that. But it's going to be a hard sell for a fan base that's so beaten and bruised when it comes to that Browns fan base. That's for sure if you do go that route. But yeah, I think those medicals are going to be huge when it comes to Abdul Carter. And hopefully the private workouts actually happen in April, because then the more red flags are going to show up, right? Like these red flags can look green sometimes. You got to be careful.
Yeah, they better be ready to have those private workouts, or that is when things will really start to be uncertain. But I love the point you're making about, it's not even that you have to hit. It just has to seem like public perception is so huge in this. Like you can miss on a pick, but if it was like the consensus pick and what everyone else would have done, there is some sort of, you give people a little bit of grace with that. But if you go against the grain and you do something real crazy, like, taking Trevor Lawrence, and Lawrence hasn't really panned out how you thought. Nobody's going to, the Jags were idiots. But when you take Travon Walker over Aiden Hutchinson, and then Aiden Hutchinson is one of the better edge rushers, now it's like, what were you guys doing? Trent Baalke, you're fired. The Mitch Trubisky thing. Like, nobody's going to fault you when you do chalk. But when you try to get crazy and it doesn't work out, that's when you really are going to take some blame there. But with that being said, that is going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. I am your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, with my co-host, the Mastermind, Ross Jackson. Make sure you guys check out the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins in the barbershop. But as I always tell you, thanks for tuning in and stay safe out there.